If all the competitors could get themselves ready to start the round, that would be wonderful. If there's any email chains or file shares that need to happen, please plan that out. If all the competitors are ready, I'm good to begin whenever you all are.
My partner is currently not present. Is it okay if we wait for him?
Nope, I'm here.
Okay, you just got here. There you go. Okay, I'm the first speaker on the neg. Is everyone ready? Okay, I'll assume that's a yes. Time will start on my first word. Every regime change begins with the same promise: remove the tyrant and free the people. And almost every single time, history answered with the same warning: when America topples the ruler, it also topples the country itself. That is the question in this round, not whether authoritarian leaders are bad. The real question is whether American force actually makes life better after the dust settles. And dozens of examples tell us the answer is no. Thus, we negate the resolution resolved. The United States is justified in using force to remove authoritarian leaders from power. Our sole contention is making bad deals worse. American regime change operations have three major harms. The first is economic damage. Paul Zachary, citing a recent British Journal of Political Science, explains regime change operations cause a 45% reduction in the dollar amount of bilateral trade, equivalent to a loss of $272 million worth in goods in trade per year per targeted country. This is because violence after regime change makes the country less attractive to foreign investors, which pushes existing firms to withdraw, weakening consumer demand. According to UNDP projections cited by Al Jazeera in 2026, the war on Iran and its effect throughout the Middle East had a devastating impact on Arab countries. Millions into poverty, regional GDP declined by 6% after a month of war. 3.7 million jobs were lost, and 4 million more people fallen below the poverty line. The second direct category of harm is direct conflict. Dr. Benjamin from Notre Dame in 2020 explains the U.S. used military force to promote regime change around the world in recent years. Operations are ineffective, likely to spark civil wars, lead to lower levels of democracy, and increased repression. O'Rourke from Boston College included in 2017 that analyzing a sample of 63 American-backed regime change attempts, they overwhelmingly led to civil war in the following decade. Successful attempts led to civil war by installing domestically unpopular rulers. This happens because U.S. operations open up a power vacuum leading to instability where various factions are left to compete for influence. In fact, U.S. intervention just creates a never-ending cycle of violence, as Greater Pacific explains that these conflicts have continued to propagate violence with no realistic, achievable end in sight. America's track record remains poor. Devastatingly, Brown University explains that U.S. wars have displaced over 38 million people in the Middle East alone. And University of Ottawa explains all parts of the world have been a target of U.S. intervention, totaling 30 million people dying because of the U.S. The only way you could ever justify such death and destruction is if America had an outstanding track record of improving the political conditions of the regions they intervene in. Unfortunately, they don't even come close. This brings us to the third and final harm: greater instability. Berger 24 from Texas Christian University explains countries experiencing American intervention average 0.76 more coups than countries that did not experience an American intervention. Every country that experienced American intervention experienced as many as or more coups after the intervention than before. This is because American backed leaders are seen as foreign puppets and are labeled as illegitimate. This perception prompts various groups to conspire against the regime. Even in the long run, enforcing democracy at gunpoint is almost never effective. As Dr. Benjamin from Notre Dame in 2020 explains, out of 28 cases of American regime change, only 3 cases have resulted in lasting democracy, and it required distinct economic and political preconditions to succeed, such as a stable economy. Most U.S. interventions are backed by interests that extend beyond humanitarian support. As the National Security Archive explains, that the Iran coup was built because they wanted to take Iran's petroleum industry by virtually any available means, including military action. At the end of the day, America's track record proves that attempts at top authoritarian leaders are ineffective. Even if it comes from a place of compassion, trying the same operations over and over again are futile. Thus, we negate.
If everyone's ready, then I can start time on my first one. Okay, then my time will begin on my first one. First, we're going to define the topic. Justified means benefit outweighs the harm. Force includes military action, but also economic pressure and negotiations. One of the best ways to stop autocracies is with force. Authoritarian leaders will never give up their power just because you tell them to. Class 22 studies the history of how authoritarian regimes collapse and links them all practically back to the same factor: force and consequences. He explains how all authoritarian leaders want power and personal gain, so give them none of that. History shows that they will continue, and they will always pursue more and more unless given consequences or warnings on what will happen. The only way to prevent them is to forcefully make them comply, or they lose everything. They would only make the choice if it's the only viable option left. This leads to our first contention of war stability. The current status quo demonstrates the danger of autocratic governments. Merle 19 explains that autocratic leaders are often motivated by maintaining and expanding their power, even at the expense of human lives. This can be seen in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, where Vladimir Putin launched a war that caused hundreds of thousands of casualties in pursuit of Russia's strategic and political goals. Similarly, the Myanmar civil war began after the military seized power in a coup and used force to maintain its control over the country. To make matters worse, North Korea continues to expand its missile and nuclear weapon programs, increasing the risk of future military conflicts. These examples show that autocratic leaders may be willing to use aggression and violence to persevere and expand their power, creating instability and conflict in the status quo. War creates millions of deaths at the best-case scenario, potentially leading to extinction. Autocrats prioritize their own power over the well-being of their citizens. As they pursue wars and military expansion, they destroy trade, infrastructure, and economic productivity. Morelli finds that across 133 countries and 150 years of data, autocratic governments consistently produce worse economic outcomes than democracies. That means that autocracies don't just cause conflict, it collapses economies. Democracy solves because democratic governments are accountable to voters and have stronger incentives to protect economic growth rather than sacrifice it for a leader's own personal ambitions. Democracies solve. Scholars like Dan Rader argue that democracies are less likely to go to war with each other because democratic institutions create norms, incentives for peaceful behavior, even when controlling other variables like wealth or geography. Democratic leaders are also accountable to voters and risk losing office if they engage in costly wars. This leads to our second contention of economic collapse. Authoritarian regime undermines economic stability because power is concentrated in a single leader with little accountability or institutional constraint. As Morelli 19 explains, this centralized control can lead to policies driven by regime survival and personal power than long-term economic management, weakening protections like wage standards and making long-term economic management and and making inflation control less consistent. With fewer checks and balances, economic decisions are more vulnerable to corruption and efficiency and short-term political goals. Comparative analysis across regime types also find that autocracies tend to be less effective at preventing conflict, suggesting that their instability can extend beyond economics into higher risks of international tension and warfare. Economic instability produces major downstream impacts, especially on climate outcomes and technological innovation. Green 24 finds that periods of economic downturn are closely associated with increased environmental degradation, as governments and industries tend to prioritize short-term survival over long-term sustainability. When economic conditions worsen, actors shift towards cheaper and more accessible economic and energy resources, which are typically more carbon incentives, such as coal, thereby increasing emissions and accelerating climate change. Democracies produce more stable and effective economic systems because political accountability forces leaders to prioritize broad public welfare. Lynn Jones argues that when citizens have meaningful political power, governments are incentivized to pursue powers that promote job creation, investment, and long-term economic growth in order to maintain public support. Because as a result, democracies generally create more predictable and stable environments compared to less accountable systems, supporting stronger long-term development. For all these reasons and the sake of the economy, we urge an AF ballot. Okay, I believe it's cross.
Yes.
Right, so do you want to take the first question?
Yeah, sure. I will start on my first word. So you say in your case that autocracies or authoritarian governments collapse economies and democracy solves. Can you specifically explain how democracy solves if the US just goes in and kills people and creates another war?
The thing is that when the US removes these dictators and these autocratic leaders from power, it helps because these autocratic leaders are so brutal to their citizens. The US helps remove them by restoring peace in the democracy itself. Building this democracy would help bring its citizens back and help bring these citizens more peace and the
Okay.
experience.
Can you give me one example where that worked?
Okay, so we can give you World War II, where the US and its allies successfully removed Hitler from power, and Germany experienced much better economic sustainability.
Okay. Can you explain how that applies to the modern world? Because, first of all, that's a long time ago. The US and its allies have changed. And additionally, we give you a statistic analyzing all interventions that tells you that they do not succeed on
The
net. Can you explain
The thing
why?
is, since World War II, the US's military has grown and its economy and government has grown, meaning that the US has more power than it originally had in the past. Wouldn't that just make the US more successful in removing these authoritarian leaders from power?
Not necessarily, because the US goes in and intervenes, but the problem is after they intervene, they overwhelmingly cause a civil war, because if the US puts in a democratic government that the people don't like, that it's going to mean that there's going to be more rebellions and there's going to be more militias, which kills more people in the end. You
But the
only
thing,
look at removing the leader. Removing the leader is the beginning. The next step, and which is actually like the beginning of the transformation, is when people get killed.
so what we're
You can
saying
get a
is
question.
the next. Sure, I'll take a question then. So is your argument that the United States is never justified in using force to remove? Wait, so is your argument that the United States should never be justified to remove these authoritarian leaders from power?
Yeah, that's what we're saying. First of all, we're the neg, and second of all, the consequences of the US intervening are massive. For example, Saddam Hussein has killed 250,000 people. The US has literally killed 1 million people in his country, and additionally, in total, there has been 30 million people killed just by the US by intervening in the Middle East alone.
But the
Can I take a
problem is
question?
that, wait, can I respond to that? But the problem
Sure.
is that we're telling you right now the military has grown, showing that the risks of them intervening in these countries will decrease
Yes,
because
the
they're much more.
military has grown, and we can give you a very recent example. During the Iran, right now, we have the Iran war, the US is going in. They're not obviously winning, and they're even losing, and they're just killing more people for nothing. Like, what was the point of the Iran war? There was no point. They
But
just
that's
want
not
to
what we're
project
trying to say.
their
We're trying to
power.
say that
They
we're
just
trying to
wanted
say
to
that
project their power.
restoring
That's it.
democracy.
Crosses up.
I'll be taking running prep. My timer will begin in 3, 2, 1. Okay, that was 1 minute and 40. Just a quick off-time roadmap. I'll be going over their case. I'll be linking our case in between, and then I'll weigh at the very end if time prevails. And my time will begin on my first word, which will be in 3, 2, 1. The app only wants to talk about what happens before the intervention occurs. They completely drop the consequences. We tell you intervention makes humanitarian crises worse. The app assumes that removing a leader immediately stops violence. In reality, wars rarely end when a leader is removed. Instead, intervention creates a power vacuum that leads to civil war, insurgency, and instability. For example, when US invaded Iraq in 2003 and removed Saddam Hussein, the country experienced years of sectarian violence, insurgency, terrorism, and hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed or displaced. Extremist organizations such as ISIS emerged in the chaos. Judges, let me remind you, when US didn't interfere, 200,000 civilians died, and when they did, over 1 million were killed. Similarly, Libya's 2011 intervention removed Muammar Gaddafi but left the country fragmented among rival militias. Human trafficking, civil war, and lawlessness followed. These examples demonstrating that just removing a leader doesn't often exchanges a crisis for another. And my opponents want to say that the US expanding their military power means they'll win more wars more easily. However, as my partner has stated, the US war with Iran, they're losing currently, and they're just killing people for no reason, basically. And we show clear recent evidence that when US intervenes and installs a new ruler, most of the time that leads to civil war. Analyzing a sample of 63 American-backed regime change attempts overwhelmingly lead to civil war in the following decade. Successful attempts led to civil war by installing domestically unpopular rulers, which ultimately led to 38 million displaced and over 30 million deaths. Secondly, we also turn NATO's intervention on Libya, initially hailed as a model for R2P, ultimately exacerbated human rights abuses and instability. They want to say that it doesn't matter how many interventions were successful, as long as the intention is good, then it's justified. But judge, what about this is justified? If nearly all interventions cause more deaths, then it's not justified. Just because we want to save lives doesn't give us the right to go into a country, cause millions to go into poverty, and cause more than 30 million people to die. Next, on economy, they talk about how authoritarian leaders cause economic collapse. However, they only give pure analytics, no actual numbers. Meanwhile, we tell you that military intervention reduces trade between US and the targeted country by 45% or $272 million worth of goods annually. This happens because violence after regime change makes the country less attractive to foreign investors, which pushes existing firms to withdraw, weakening consumer demand. Additionally, modern conflicts show the same pattern on a larger scale. For example, war with Iran has spilled over to cause severe economic damage across the Middle East. According to UNDP projections cited by the Al Jazeera, just 1 month of war was expected to shrink regional GDP by over 6%, costing Arab economies $194 billion. The conflict also eliminated 3.7 million jobs and pushed over 4 million people into poverty. Any single impact they can link it to their economic contention is also true for the next side. Now, moving on to the contention regarding economy. Regarding democracy, the app argues that the US is justified in using force to remove leaders because it can restore democracy and give people self-determination. However, first, democracy must come from people, not foreign armies. Self-determination means that the citizens have the ability to choose their own government without outside control. When the US uses military force to remove a government, it risks replacing one form of control with another. A government created after foreign intervention lacks legitimacy because it is seen as being imposed by an outside power rather than being chosen by citizens. Secondly, regime change often creates instability instead of democracy. Successful democracy requires strong institutions, rule of law, security, public trust, all of which past interventions lack. Intervention may remove a dictator, but does not build these foundations. Examples like Iraq and Libya show that removing leaders can lead to civil conflict, corruptions, and weakened governments rather than stable democracies. And finally, US has a poor record of successfully creating democracies through force. Military intervention damages democratic movements by allowing opponents to portray performers as foreign-backed instead of strengthening self-determination. Now on to weighing. Firstly, we weigh on probability. We tell you that nearly all US interventions lead to more deaths. And secondly, on magnitude, add all of their impacts together and it still does not outweigh 30 million deaths. And that is why I urge a neg ballot. Thank you.
I'll take running prep. Starting now. That was 1 minute of prep. I'm ready. So just a quick off-time roadmap first. I'm just going to go on to overview for our contention and then answering their arguments. Then I'm going to go onto my own rebutting. So, opponents, are you guys ready? Judge, are you all ready? Okay, then my time starts. No, first overview for war. Autocratic warfare is already creating millions of deaths worldwide. Global instability is already one of the biggest problems currently. Merlin did a research study regarding causation of war, and majority can be linked to autocracy. This is because autocracies always pursue power, not peace, as a single person is in charge, meaning diplomacy is basically impossible. The US using force to stop this is one of the best ways to stop this horrendous cycle. Even if force creates some deaths right now, autocracies will slowly die out as more action and backlash is put against them. Passing the resolution means being an autocracy is an extremely difficult situation. Frontlining. Their entire rebuttal is about what happens after the US intervenes. There's absolutely no context at all. I'll provide a few examples of why this is wrong. First is because because of the forceful intervention, the country will be out of resources. Therefore, meaning that any corruption isn't possible because of the fear the US is forcefully going there and stopping them from being able to do this. This is the part of the resolution we're trying to debate. It's not a can debate, it's a should debate. Meaning this argument absolutely cannot stand. The US will regulate change, and this is guaranteed. You can't question whether or not the resolution is going to implement. We're debating should the resolution implement. Therefore, this entire argument absolutely doesn't work. They're trying to question the part of force which is rebuilding. The rebuilding part is included in the resolution. Next, they provide a few examples. First, they give Libya, but after intervention, the country was normal and then chaos happened. There's no correlation between intervention and then the civil war that happened. These are two completely different activities. We give Panama, Japan, Germany, all rebuild democracies. Next, the first subject to consider before casting the ballot is that the negative status quo guarantees extinction. 3 pieces of evidence for this. 1, global authoritarianism creates extinction. Only strong influence by democratic states solve. Banfield 23 says a world dominated by totalitarian states would be more orphan than democratic states, who will increase the risk of collapse and extinction. A world dominated that fewer wars miscount would be a problem for totalitarian states due to personalization and incentives for accurate info. War makes extinction likely by WMD being used. Totalitarian states are less cooperative. Number 2 is because autocracies are inherently bad for the world. Link 1 is conflict. Helmer 26. Autocratization paves way for more and bloodier conflicts. According to Kant's idea of perpetual peace, democracies do not attack other democracies for resurgent. Autocrat attacking is no longer out of bounds. One hallmark of autocratization is the strategic use of disinformation by anti-demographic actors, strategies aimed at influencing public opinion. 3, autocracies are disastrous to the world. Link 2 is economy. Democracies at world's risk worldwide. Economy may be 271 out of 195 countries saw their democratic institutions erode in recent years under autocratic leadership of which is now a bitter power struggle. Venezuela has seen financial ruin. Next, the US has adapted a new definition of force intervention. Justified using force means supporting the way US is doing force. The force has shifted away from military to more diplomatic threats, meaning none of their arguments are accessible. Use the U.S.'s definition force for this debate. Cooper 25 says the current Trump administration's new strategic security departs from focus on major power. The new NSS adopts a more tone to competitors working to rebalance America's economic relationship. So now force also can include economy and relationship wise. It doesn't only include military. The word military isn't even in the resolution. 6, link is impossible. U.S. military is too strong for retaliation. Michael E. The United States is the best military in the world today by far. U.S. defense is spending 3 times as much as China and accounts for 1/3 of all global military expenditures, meaning that they have the ability to stop them. 7, the crisis of countries that the U.S. has intervened as at most created death of hundreds. O'Hannon and Sandberg 26 says the United States best military in the world today, by far, U.S. forces have few and no weaknesses at all, and Americans can play a totally different league from other militaries of other countries, nor is the situation likely to change anytime soon. So to summarize, their entire speech was about this rebuilding argument, which is absolutely unrelated because the resolution says that we justify using force, therefore we justify this rebuilding that is guaranteed, and also they have no resources to make this anyways. Thank you. I'm ready for cross when you guys are.
Okay. Before I start timer, is it okay if I take the first question?
Yes.
Okay. My time will begin in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so didn't you say that military force is the best way to control autocratic leaders?
Yes, but there's other ways that included in force, such as economic and other sorts of treaty negotiations that we could also use instead of force. Military force can be a last resort. Economic and strategic force can be what we do first.
Okay, you can take question.
Okay, so about your give the example about Libya. When did the Libya civil war start?
I'm sure you can tell me that.
Hmm?
I'm sure you can answer that, right?
Okay, then when did US intervention end?
You can also answer that. I believe your point was that the Civil War started before America
Yes.
intervened. Is that correct?
Yes, that
So
they're
you're-
absolutely
we
irrelevant
also
activities.
gave other
And
examples.
actually,
We also gave
Huh?
other examples such as Iraq.
no choice. What are the examples?
Iraq, we gave you that example. It's like America originally 200,000 civilians were killed. When America went in, over 1 million were killed.
Wait, no, we need to clarify this. You said you have other examples other than Libya. What are the countries other than Libya that are included?
When we stated when US invaded Iraq in 2003 and removed Saddam Hussein, that was an example we gave you to our rebuttal.
That's fine. You can take a question.
Okay. So when you say justified, do you mean legally justified or morally justified?
Justified terms means that this is ethical. We should do it because the benefits outweigh the harms. That's the way that we would interpret the resolution.
Okay. You can have
Okay. Okay. On your rebuilding argument, do you think the resolution includes rebuilding as part of the forced intervention?
No.
How does it not include it?
It just says the US is justified to use use force to remove authoritarian leaders. Where does it bring up rebuilding, guaranteed rebuilding? Like
It's
it
not
never.
removing the authoritarian leader. Part of that removal is rebuilding.
Where does it say that?
It doesn't need to say because it's already part of the
So
resolution.
your own definition where you're saying the perfect circumstance that we intervene, we give them the perfect government, the perfect system, and then that's the definition of the resolution is what you're saying.
And also, what is the statistic about the number of deaths after intervention happened? Like during the
Sure, we
rebuilding phase,
gave
like
you
you say.
we gave you over 63 sampled cases, right? Nearly all of them led to civil war, and military intervention over the years has caused over 30 million deaths. We also gave you that card.
Wait, military intervention or after military intervention?
Military intervention has caused 30 million
Intervention
deaths.
only? No, I was asking a statistic about after intervention happened. How many deaths were caused?
What do you mean?
After like during the
intervention.
rebuilding phase, like you said, how many deaths were caused during the rebuilding phase?
I don't know what the number is, but I know that military intervention itself has caused 30 million deaths. If that answers your question.
That's cross. That's cross.
You should have.
Okay. I have 1:20 left, so I'm gonna take a minute. Time starts now. Okay, I'm gonna pause it there. I believe that I have 40 seconds left. And first of all, is all the judges and opponents ready? Okay. Then time will start on my first word. But before that, I'm gonna do a quick offhand roadmap. I'm gonna first be clearing up the topic. Then it's gonna go on frontlining and extending their case and then weighing. Time will start on my first word. First, let's make the topic clear. The exact wording of the resolution says, the United States is justified in using force to remove authoritarian leaders from power. As my partner Brandon stated in Crossfire, rebuilding is never in this resolution. Let's break down the resolution for you. It asks whether there is a reason, if there is a reason or there is a justifiable reason that the United States can go into a country, intervene, and remove the authoritarian leader. This topic never mentions rebuilding. Rebuilding is the consequences, and it is not justified for the U.S. to go in, commit war crimes, and kill 30 million people. That is not justified. Now, first of all, they want a perfect safety net. That does not exist. They oversimplify the round. They think the US is strong, so they can defeat the country that they're trying to intervene in and put a government and everything is stable. That is not what actually happens. For example, if you were a person in an authoritarian country and you were authoritarian and the US suddenly comes in, invades your country, kills your family members, and puts in a democratic leader, you're not going to like that. That naturally means that there's going to be more rebellions and more coups and more militias that creates instability. We give you all the examples. There's a study that analyzes all the examples, all 63 American-backed regime change attempts, and on net they lead to civil war in the following decade. That also refutes their argument about the time gap between the Civil War and when the chaos happened. Those are two separate things because our evidence shows you that civil war in the following decade. Civil war doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be right after what happens. Additionally, you should default to our evidence because it studies everything, while they only give us specific examples, such as Germany, which is way too old and not modern enough, and they talk about Libya and Panama. Next, again, they talk about how our entire rebuttal is on consequences. But even if consequences is after, that doesn't mean that it should be disregarded. Again, we tell you that it is not justified for the US during the intervention to kill 30 million people. That is not justified. Additionally, authoritarian leaders literally kill less people than the United States does. For example, during the Iraq invasion, Saddam Hussein killed 250,000 people. Guess how many the US killed in that time? 1 million people. It is not justified for the US to do that. Even if there is a reason, it does not mean that it is justified for the US to actually do it. And most of the time, it's just because the US wants to make more power. Additionally, we tell you on our economy argument that the economy improves, meaning that their climate change argument also collapses. Again, 3.7 million people lose their jobs and 4 million people fall into poverty. Don't let them do this.
So I'll take running prep. Starting now. Okay, so that was 43 seconds of prep, and if everyone's ready, then I can start my summary speech on my first word. Okay, then my time will start in 3, 2, 1. Judge, this debate is not about whether every U.S. intervention has been perfect. The resolution asks whether the United States is justified in using force to remove authoritarian leaders from power. When peaceful options fail and innocent people continue to suffer, the answer is yes. The biggest flaw in the next case is their comparison. Throughout this round, they compare intervention to a peaceful status quo, but that's not reality. The countries we're discussing are already facing authoritarian oppression, regional aggression, and mass atrocities or humanitarian crises. The choice isn't intervention versus peace peace. It's intervention versus allowing those harms to continue. First, let's extend our deterrence and humanitarian offense. Authoritarian leaders stay in power through violence, repression, and fear. As our case explains, they're most likely to pursue aggression than democratic governments. The credible possibility of intervention deters those leaders from committing even greater abuses and giving the international community a way to stop autocracies when diplomacy has failed. The neg also never gives you a realistic alternative. Saying don't intervene doesn't save lives. It leaves civilians trapped under regimes committing the very harms they acknowledge. Second, their examples do not disprove of the resolution. Almost every argument they make relies on Iraq, Libya, or Iran. Those are very cherry-picked examples. One or two controversial interventions cannot determine whether force is ever justified. They also repeatedly tell you that numbers like 30 million deaths, but they never prove causation. They combine decades of conflicts and involving insurgencies, regional actors, and multiple causes, then simply blame every death on U.S. intervention. Big numbers are not better arguments. They also attack Libya, but they commit a post hoc fallacy. Hoc fallacy. Just because instability happened afterwards does not mean intervention caused every later conflict. Libya had a deep internal division and multiple armed groups that existed independently. Correlation is not causation. Now let's weigh this round. First, we win on magnitude. We prevent mass atrocities and protect civilians. Those are irreversible harms and outweigh temporary economic losses. The neg is telling us that we should keep the status quo where many people are being abused by these brutal authoritarian leaders. We have to do something to help these people and prevent them from these harms that are irreversible. Second, probability. The neg assumes every future intervention will fail just because of a few controversial historical cases, but we never claim intervention is perfect. We argue it's justified when peaceful measures have failed and the alternative is continuing to suffer, meaning we need the U.S. to intervene to be able to restore this peace in our economy. Third, we also went on time frame. The harms under authoritarian rules are happening right now. Every day inaction means more repression, more displacement, and more civilian deaths. Judge, the neg asks you to reject intervention because it carries risks, but every option carries risks. The real comparison is intervention versus allowing authoritarian leaders to continue committing atrocities unchecked. When diplomacy fails, sanction fails, and innocent civilians have nowhere else to turn, using force becomes the last available tool to protect human lives. For those reasons, we urge an affirmative ballot in today's debate. I believe it's Grand Cross. Are you guys ready for Grand?
Okay. Are you guys ready for us?
Yeah.
Okay. You guys can take the first question.
Okay, so I'll start cross on my first question. So, do you believe that the United States is ever justified in using force to remove an authoritarian leader?
Not if it's going to cause more deaths.
But we've shown you in the past where authoritarian leaders have been removed by the U.S. and it led to very much better democracies and better economies in their country. So why wouldn't you want to restore this peace in these countries?
Okay, so you're telling me that like you don't care about like the millions of people that die after the intervention?
We're telling you that that won't happen now because the U.S.'s military has expanded and has gotten better.
In the past 63 samples we took, it almost always led to more deaths. You can't just deny that evidence.
On net, specifically on net, 63 of them caused and sparked civil wars, decreased democracy, which is literally what you said is the solution. They literally just decrease democracy, and they also kill more people.
Every single autocracies are killing people continuously in the past history. So if we don't stop them right now, why would we want?
Okay, sure. Let's compare it. The U.S. killed 30 million. Authoritarian countries, if you add them up, it compares nothing to 30 million. The U.S. has literally killed more. For example, in Iraq, I'm not cherry picking examples. For example, in Iraq, 250,000 people died because of Saddam Hussein. Guess how many the U.S. killed? 1 million people. That's not comparable. Authoritarian regimes literally
the U.S.
economy in the United States
has expanded. Not going to happen anymore if their military has expanded in the past. They're much more powerful than they were before.
Speculation. We gave past examples and you keep on saying it's better now. But like we said, in the recent examples that we tell you, there's more deaths. You can't deny it once again.
Okay, but the problem with the current example of Iran is that like Iran's example is currently right, but then the U.S. intervening in other like autocratic countries is just going to help restore their peace. Iran's war is going on right now and they're losing, but that doesn't mean that it won't work in the future. Yeah, sure, there has been failed crises of the U.S. intervening, but there has also been successful crises where it has restored peace in many other countries.
Okay, I believe that's time. Thank you.
Oh, wait, no, we have one more minute.
I thought Red Cross was 2 minutes. No.
3.
Okay. Well, we can proceed.
Okay. Do you have a question?
No, you guys can ask.
All right, Elias, do you have a question?
Okay, what is your definition of removing an authoritarian leader?
Like what the resolution says, removing authoritarian leader with no safety net. You're removing the leader. We never guarantee any like stable government after it.
Well, we have seen in past cases where the government has been much better and the civilians have
Is it
experienced
guaranteed
much
though?
better lives.
If it's guaranteed, then every single intervention should have
Oh,
ended.
failure isn't guaranteed either. So why would we want to rely on past failures just to determine our future? Wait,
No,
that's
I'm saying on net it's gonna happen. Like I'm saying on net, it has been shown that more deaths occur.
time.
Like I'm not gonna deny that there haven't been like one or two cases where it's been good, but like on net it's been bad. You can't deny
It's
that.
been overcrowded for a long time.
Okay. I believe we have 20 seconds left of prep. We'll just be taking the remainder of that, starting in 3, 2, 1. And and that was time for prep. My quick off-time roadmap. I'll be going over the main points of clash in this round, clarifying the resolution, and then I'll be weighing at the very end. And is everybody ready? Okay. My speech starts on my timer starts on my first word, which will be in 3, 2, 1. Okay, first on economy, my opponents completely dropped the fact that U.S. interventions have led to the loss of $272 million worth of goods in a single year, a 6% GDP loss, and 3.7 million jobs lost, and more than 4 million people will fall into poverty. They completely dropped this argument during summary, therefore it goes uncontested. Secondly, on genocide and regime change, we give several responses. First, Judge, let me ask you a question. Is it justified for the U.S. to kill 30 million people in the Middle East alone? No. If Saddam Hussein killed 250,000, is it justified that the US goes into Iraq and kill 1 million more people? No. This round boils down to the removal of the leader and the consequences. Additionally, this resolution did not say that the US is only justified in using military force under the perfect realized circumstances. It states that the US is justified in using military force and have historically created civil wars, which led to 38 million displaced and over 30 million deaths. My opponents are practically telling us to ignore post-intervention harms and claim it is justified because we have no other choice. But Judge, there is another choice, and it's not to intervene. If nearly all interventions cause more deaths, then it's not justified. I repeat, it is not justified because it almost always leads to more deaths. Now, let me repeat. They oversimplify the topic. They assume that because the US military is strong, they can just go in and kick the bad guys out. That is oversimplified. Assume you're in the shoes of a civilian in an autocratic country. Would you want the US to come in, remove your leader, kill your family? No. Naturally, there will be rebellions and civil war. Trust our evidence once again. And now let's go on to weighing. First of all, we completely outweigh our probability. We tell you that on net, there are more deaths. On net, I repeat, on net, there are more deaths. It doesn't matter what they say about their intentions. On net, there are more deaths. And they have not given a single card that proves us otherwise. And secondly, on magnitude, we outweigh on every single impact they have. Add all of them together, and we still outweigh by 30 million deaths. And thus, I urge a neg ballot. Thank you.
I think I have. Okay, I'll just take the remainder of prep. Starting now. That's time. I'm ready to give my speech. So is everybody ready? Okay. Then my time starts now. First framework for this debate. There's a few things that clarify. 2 reasons why the deterrence contention should not exist. First, this is a should debate, not a can debate. If we prove that deterrence argument is a question of the topic, not the consequences, they do not have a case. Literature proves to remove autocracies from power means taking the power away entirely. Even after the authoritarian leader is dead, the power is still within the followers who follow him. So, by the resolution is still definition, being able to fight off this violence that is still part of the authoritarian leader's power. This means by the logic of the resolution, rebuilding is still removing, as you're cleaning up the mess or deconstructing the role. 2, this argument goes out of what the debate should be about. It's only about when the U.S. force is available. Anything else is not relevant at all. Not only this, but justified means short-term gain. Everything else after that is not the U.S.'s fault. They did what they could, and everything that happens. Prefer this form of the debate. They dropped the fact that autocracies are horrible. Thank you so much, Bainfield and Hillmeyer. Conceptually, because autocracies are so problematic, because of power, they theoretically fail the globe. Also, Russia and Germany prove that so many deaths are created before we actually have authors, examples, and statistics. They have not provided a single country in the final focus. Next, intervention does not always create deaths. In rebuttal summary, there have been no responses to this argument. Force qualifies as economy and other strategic opportunities too, not only the military. So economic treaty and autocracy simply back down by the process of it. There's no evidence that this doesn't actually work, meaning that their peace is guaranteed too. Next, rebuilding is their only impact on the debate. The fiat argument eliminates this, though only when force argument takes this out too. And even if that you don't buy any of that, after intervention, rebuilding will have a high chance of happening, even if these 2 responses don't apply, because weakness and fear in country will be. The economy argument was brought out to you. All there needs to be said is other factors determine economy and force doesn't impact that much. So put this around into perspective. Millions of deaths from autocracies. We listed names, we gave examples and timelines throughout the entire debate. They did none of that. They have only thousands most from intervention, and they dropped the peace argument. Probably haven't shown through evidence and analysis, and they have no evidence either. So assent should win. Good debate, guys. Thank you so
All right,
much.
good round, guys. Good round.
Good debate. Thank you, judges. You guys are really good.